is a particular kind of silence that only exists after midnight in a recording studio, when the rest of the city has given up on being awake, and the only sound is the hum of the ventilation system and someone breathing softly on the other side of a glass partition. It is not the silence of emptiness. It is the silence of everything that has already been said. The music recorded. The session's finished. The engineer's gone home. And what remains is the residue of all that effort and intention still present in the air, the way perfume is still present in a room hours after the person who wore it has left. Mara had been working on the same sentence for 40 minutes, a line from a Portuguese novel that refused to translate, that kept slipping through the net of every English word she tried. She would get close. She could feel when she was close, could feel the meaning of the original sitting just behind the glass of her best attempt, and then it would recede again. She'd be left holding something that was almost right, but not right, which in translation is the same as being wrong. The sentence was about a particular kind of knowing, about the moment just before understanding arrives, the threshold between not knowing and knowing, when meaning is present in the body, but has not yet made it to the surface of consciousness. The Portuguese had a word for this that had no English equivalent. She was trying to build one from available materials, and the available materials kept failing her. She'd been circling the sentence with her pen. There were notes in 3 languages in the margins, a habit she had developed over 12 years of translation work, using whatever language came closest to the idea, rather than insisting on the destination language, before she had properly understood the source. The notebook looked like a conversation between several versions of herself. This was, in fact, what it was. She didn't notice Daniel leaning against the doorframe until he spoke her name. And something happened when he said it. Her name, just her name, that made her look up, not because he had called her, but because of the particular tenderness of it, the way it landed in the room, like he had been carrying it for a while, and finally decided to set it down. There was something in the way he held it in his mouth, as if it were something worth holding carefully, as if the act of saying it was worth doing slowly. She had worked beside him for 8 months. 8 months in the particular intimacy of a small translation studio, where 2 people share the specialized loneliness of looking for words that don't quite exist in the language you need them in. silences had a different quality from other people's silences, being full rather than empty. She knew that he had spent 3 months on a translation of a poem that was only 14 lines long, and that when he finally finished it, he had sat very still for several minutes before printing it, as if stillness were the appropriate response to completion. She knew these things the way you know rooms you've lived in, without having to think. They had accumulated naturally, the way warmth accumulates in a room when someone has been in it long enough. And she had for some time been trying to decide what to do with the accumulated warmth. Falling in love, she was slowly realizing, is mostly composed of small exactnesses, not the large gestures. Those are easy to dismiss or misread. It is the way someone remembers what you said 2 weeks ago, the way they leave a little space when you're thinking rather than filling it, the way they say your name when they are not trying to get your attention, but simply acknowledging that you exist and that your existence is, to them, worth acknowledging. She'd been cataloging these small exactnesses for longer than she had admitted to herself. She had cataloged them with the same care she brought to the translation work, word by word, checking each one against the original to see if it held. She had not allowed herself to name what she was cataloging. This was a form of protection she had become skilled at. Naming a feeling makes it real in a way that requires you to do something about it. She had been keeping the question open, the way you keep a word open in translation when you haven't found the right one yet. But tonight, something about the late hour and the empty studio and the sense that wouldn't resolve, and his voice saying her name in that particular way had moved the question from open to urgent. She thought about thresholds, about the particular quality of standing in one, the way you are simultaneously in two places, belonging fully to neither, the old world behind you and the new world not yet entered, the specific suspended state of the in-between, which is its own country, with its own particular weather. She thought this is what the Portuguese sentence is about, not a feeling, the moment before the feeling, the threshold. She thought, I am living in the threshold right now. I'm standing in the exact space the sentence is trying to describe. She thought about all the things she had not said in 8 months, not because they were unsayable, but because she had not yet found the language for them. She had been doing what she always did with difficult material, sitting with it vibes that weren't quite right. Daniel crossed the room and pulled out the chair beside her. Not across from her, but beside her, close enough that she could see the text on her notebook, upside down from his ankle, and sat down with the unhurried quality of someone who had decided something and was now simply enacting that decision. There was nothing tentative in the movement. It was the movement of someone who was finished deliberating. He looked at the sentence she'd been circling, leaned forward slightly, read it with the same patience he gave all text, the patience of someone for whom language was not a convenience, but a country in itself, one worth taking seriously, worth entering properly. She watched his eyes move across the words. She watched him read. "It's a sentence about threshold," he said finally. "The original isn't describing a feeling. It's describing the moment, just before the feeling becomes a feeling. The moment when it is still only potential." He paused. "The exact moment when you know something is about to happen, but it hasn't happened yet. When knowing and experiencing are separated by the thinnest possible distance." She looked at him. He was looking at the page. She turned the word threshold in her mind, feeling it settle into the space around the sentence the way a key settles into a lock. Not turning yet, but fitting. Fitting exactly. "That's it," she said, quietly. "The way you say something when it's been true for a while, and you've only just found the word for it." He turned toward her then, and their faces were closer than either of them had quite accounted for. And she watched his expression do something she had never seen it do in 8 months of working beside him. Watched it open very slightly in the way that faces open when people stop protecting something they have been protecting for a long time. She had spent a great deal of time studying language, the space between what was said and what was meant, the way a word could hold two things simultaneously without rupturing. She recognized now the particular grammar of what was happening between them, a sentence that had been building toward its verb for 8 months and was only now reaching it. She turned her face toward his, just slightly, just enough. Their eyes met at a distance of perhaps 6 inches, closer than colleagues, not yet close enough for what was happening. And she watched him read her expression, the way he read foreign text, carefully, giving it the time it deserved, not rushing toward meaning. His eyes were dark and very still. There was something in them she recognized as her own feeling, reflected back at her, and recognizing it made her chest open like a window. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The sentence was already being written between them in a language that required no translation. When he kissed her, it was the quietest possible beginning of His lips found her slowly, not tentatively, but with patience. The way you lower yourself into water you know is exactly the right temperature. One hand came up to her jaw, thumb resting just below her cheekbone, tilting her face to meet him with a gentleness that undid her completely. She felt his breath merge with hers before their lips had even fully touched. That warm intermingling of air, the intimacy of breathing in the same breath, and then his mouth pressed softly to hers. Not a question, not an answer, something older than either. A statement that had always been true, finally spoken aloud. His fingers curved around her face like he was holding something he'd been afraid to hold. She felt him exhale through his nose, slow and long, as if the moment were releasing him from something he had been carrying without permission to set down. The exhale is someone who has been holding something carefully for a very long time and has finally found a place safe enough to put it. Her hands found his forearms. She didn't pull him closer. She simply rested there, present in her own palms, feeling the warmth of him as if to say, I know. I'm here too. I've been here. She was aware, distantly, of the ventilation system continuing its hum, of the city outside carrying on in its sleeping, of the sentence still open on the notebook between them, the one about the moment before a feeling becomes a feeling. She understood it now. She understood it in the warmth of his mouth on hers, and the particular stillness of the studio around them, and the knowledge that something that had been potential for 8 months was now real, was now irreversible, was now something she would carry forward into every day that came after this one. The kiss went on. Neither of them was in a hurry. They had 8 months of patience behind them. They knew, both of them, how to wait for the right word. And they knew, now, that they had found it. When they parted, they stayed close, foreheads almost touching, eyes still closed. The studio was perfectly silent. Outside, the city existed. In here, only this. She found the translation for that Portuguese line the next morning. This sentence had always meant, some things can only be understood when you stop trying to understand them. And they knew now that they had found it. When they parted, they stayed close, foreheads almost touching, eyes still closed. The studio was perfectly silent. Outside, the city existed. In here, only this. She found the translation for that Portuguese line the next morning. The sentence had always meant, "Some things can only be understood when you stop trying to understand them."